Good morning, Memorial Drive friends, family, or afternoon or evening. Happy President's Day today, but probably not once this is published. Um, Jason preached yesterday. On Valentine's Day, he talked to us about lust. So, Jason, what review yesterday, highlights?
Yeah, so I will save the timing piece for later. We'll discuss. We'll talk about how do they say the backdrop of the story or whatever. But anyway, yeah, the sermon focus was on how the devil's tactics show up in our life, and this first focus is lust. And the key here, what we're really trying to really separate is this dynamic that we have felt sin, all sin, in particular lust, is an accusation. If we talk lust, I think most people maybe maybe they don't struggle with this as much as other sin, but I think it's perceived as an accusation either against themselves or someone else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And rightly so, because lust hurts our families. Lust hurts our lives. You know, I mean, lust is very, it's a sin. It tears down the things that are good and peace bringing, life bringing. So very much so. But to really see it in context, how the word lust has multiple usage, positive and negative. Context matters. And then specifically coming out of James chapter 1, verse 13 and following, where he says, you have these desires, these lusts, um, but they don't become sin until you're dragged away by them. So the devil is the one doing the enticing. And I don't think I said this in the sermon, but that where it says you're enticed, that's not you. You're being acted upon.
Mm.
You're not enticing yourself. The devil is very active in taking your cravings, your longings, your lust, and then attaching it in a sinful way to something, and then pulling on you, and that's where it gives birth to sin.
Mm.
And that's the dynamic that we want to distinguish. Then we use Matthew 1 or 5:28 as just that point of comparison of, or not a point of comparison, but like a case study where it says, I'm telling you, if you look on a woman to lust or look on a woman lustfully, you're committing adultery. And understanding that's not noticing that you're attracted. That's not what it's talking about there. That's for the intention to be dragged away by the thought, to look on someone lustfully. So that's a nutshell, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. But yeah, that was the emphasis that I was trying to put in front of us.
And great job yesterday. Um, it felt like just a burst of so many more things to talk about. Like so many different avenues to go down. If you had more time, what would you have focused on, or what do you wish you could have said?
Well, this is a little behind the scenes. So I recorded on Thursday. So yesterday morning, I'm watching it with my family, and the video starts, about love, and they're giving advice on love, and the scripture reading is love is patient, and all of a sudden it hit me. I When I preached on Thursday, I knew Valentine's Day was coming, but it didn't occur to me. It just didn't occur to me in the recording. Furthermore, we have a focus verse that is 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, and I didn't even reference it.
Mm.
My whole intention was then to redirect it in two directions, but I ran out of time. And then
Yeah.
but honestly, it's not that I ran out of time, because I recorded that sermon. I usually record it one time, but I recorded the sermon 3 times to get it manageable time wise. And by the third time, to just be honest, I was tired. So that, honestly, and because usually we'd have till Sunday to keep working on it in our heads and that kind of thing. But now, you know how this goes. All of a sudden on Wednesday, you have to have it done by Thursday morning. And so I just lost track of it. But I would have emphasized two dynamics for sure. Number one, lust and love aren't the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Mm.
We can talk about that more later. But love is the ultimate counter, because if you look at that verse in particular, love is patient. Patient is the exact opposite of the inertia of lust.
Mm.
Lust says, I want it and I want it now. Like I feel that when you talk about wrath, I wonder how many times my wrath comes from lust unfulfilled. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then of course, once lust is fulfilled, it doesn't lead to satisfaction. It leads to more dissatisfaction. But that dynamic of how being patient and kind and not envying and not boasting is truly a counter to all the sins, but in particular with the nature of the way lust drives a lot of other things, it's this counter. It's a beautiful positive, you know. And then the second thing is, how do you help people who you perceive are lustful?
Hmm.
You know, how do you take the plank out of your eye and you know offer yourself to God to remove the speck from another person? And I meant to give that a little time, and it slipped my mind and didn't fit in the time.
Hmm. Yeah, I was struck by once again how Satan takes something beautiful and he wants to distort it and pull us away from God instead of being appreciative for God. Like it's just amazing how he can take things that God makes beautiful and just messes us up.
Mhm. Yeah, that's right. You know, it hit me, and it may have just been during that third sermon, but in the Exodus passage, in the Ten Commandments passage, where covet is the corollary to that's a Hebrew word, obviously in the Old Testament, but it's a corollary to the Greek word epithumeo, which is that longing for, this craving, and it's saying don't covet, don't long
Mhm.
for, and it starts with your neighbor's house. So right there, you're like, it's bigger than sexual, because that
Yeah,
I think when people say lust, they think, oh, sexual,
yeah.
and I think a lot of people allow themselves to lust because it's not sexual.
Mm,
Yeah, no, I'm just daydreaming about this. I'm just,
yeah,
but if you are fixated on, man, if I could just have that, even if it's a good thing, that's lust. I
yeah,
mean, I mean, that's the nature of getting lost in it, and then it becoming a driver.
yeah. Man, um okay, so confession. I have wanted a Jeep Wrangler ever since I sold mine 22 years ago. Like I can tell you how long ago it was. And then when they came out with four-door Jeeps, I was so happy. We're living in Mexico, and I thought, well, I won't be able to get a Jeep again until my kids, one of them graduates from high school, because why have a car that carries four when you have a family of five? And so I thought as soon as we move back to the States, I'll get a four-door Jeep because that can hold a family. Um, so one of our AIM students, his parents were living in a little town called Lazaro Cardenas off on the beach, western side of Mexico. And we went to visit his family, and his mom had a four-door Jeep. And oh man, it was beautiful. One of the most beautiful colors of blue. And so he's given me a ride around. I think maybe he let me drive it a little bit, and we pulled back up to his house, and he goes, "You want to take it for a bit more of a drive?" And I realized I shouldn't. Like if and like I wouldn't have thought of the word lust, but I could tell in me I wanted that vehicle so much. I think I would have started wanting to leave Mexico so that I could go home and drive this car. And it was just like, let's put this in the garage and let's just not spend more time in it. And it is the weirdest realization of I could feel myself wanting this above anything else. Um, but I didn't have a word for it, which I think is fascinating.
Right. I think that is great insight, and this is why it's so important for you as an individual, every individual, to do their own work, and we call it soul work, which that can be used in a lot of different ways, but that means being honest with yourself and God, painfully honest.
Yeah,
And if you don't know, there's a lot of stuff I don't know about myself still, so I have
yeah,
to keep asking God, why do I do what I do, and how is this working in my head, and man, it has been a just an explosion of learning since I started asking those questions, because the work you just did there, the work you're speaking of, is, I think so many people would say, no big deal, no big deal. And the challenge is, if you don't take the time to assess whether it's a big deal, it often becomes a big deal.
right, right.
It becomes the driver, and all of a sudden you're you're steering, no pun intended, I was actually going there, but you're steering towards um stuff for reasons you're not even conscious of, because you
Hmm.
won't take the time and say, what's really driving me?
Yeah.
And I think that's a tremendous observation.
Yeah. It makes me think of that first step of be aware. Like that is just so elementary and so far beyond me. Like uh I have set up my life in a way that it is the most what I tell myself is it is easiest and safest if I'm not aware.
Mhm.
Because then I can just stay in my rut, in my pattern. And the truth is it's not the best. Like that, it goes back to when I was a child, I created these patterns. But now that I'm adult, I should ask, is this really um is that still the best thing for me? Is it the best thing for my wife and kids? But it's that first step of becoming aware of what grabs my desire and starts leading me towards it.
That I think that is just so good, and so many things right there what you just said. That idea of recognizing everything I do today, I am reaping what I've sown, not just yesterday, but for all the years of my life. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And anything that's unexamined will continue to happen. So I think
Hmm.
for people saying, look at me, I'm Jason, I'm 50 years old. You know what I mean? I haven't been a kid for years and years, but if I haven't examined the patterns of my life, I probably am still doing kid things.
Yeah.
The things I learned as a kid to survive. And I think that's the really yeah, that's so powerful that and this is the idea. I think that's why Jesus calls us to be disciples, learners, perpetually open to God to
Hmm.
teach us new things, seeking that, including and maybe especially about ourselves.
Yeah.
Because if I have a blind spot, it will continue to, how do I say this, to minimize my ability to grow. It doesn't stop it, but if I have a blind spot, number one, God's going to be working on breaking in there, and He usually
Hmm.
does it through situations or brothers and sisters. But if I have a blind spot, it makes it more difficult. It impedes my progress.
Yeah.
You know, so when we talk about sin being a revelation instead of an accusation, and that's basically what Paul said. Once you wrote down the sin, now I knew, but before that I didn't know. And so God is pointing this out not to put us down, but rather to show us the way to freedom.
Yeah. You made such a good point about it giving birth to death.
Mm.
Like that is such a good point because I feel like that's one of those things where we can feel it in ourselves, but we're not putting words to it. And it's almost like if we could step back and get perspective and look at it and realize, yeah, that's what was happening if I were aware to call it that.
Yeah. Well, for me, I remember and it's not that I'm fully beyond lust, but I remember really struggling, in my 20s and 30s, and I was reading those books, Every Man's Battle,
Mm.
and then Every Young Man's Battle, and Every Man's Cousin's Battle, and they were just putting it out there. I think I read them all. I Kissed Dating Goodbye, even though I was already married, I was reading that. I was just trying to get any angle. There was a great book called Father Wound about a guy that had been in ministry, very successful, and then blew his marriage up, his ministry up by
Mm.
having an affair, and then the soul work he did to figure out what happened there. Um, but bottom line, the techniques that were giving to me were helping, but they weren't working. I had to drill deep in to figure out what is it that keeps taking me back here. And what I realized is when I was younger, honestly, before I even had awareness of sexuality, I would escape into fantasy because I felt nowhere else was I accepted, including my own home. And so it was an escape for me. And what happened is, as I aged and sexuality became a reality, that joined that, but the root wasn't sexuality. The root was I was just trying to find acceptance. And so what I realized into my 20s and 30s and 40s was what's happening when my mind goes there to lust. It's really I'm wanting acceptance. So simply praying for the person I was lusting for, or bouncing my eyes, or any of those techniques, which are fine, I mean, turning off the TV or whatever it was that the source was coming from, I needed to dig into God and say, God, I don't feel accepted right now. I feel marginalized. I feel disrespected. And it's that origin is not everybody's origin.
Yeah.
I'm saying that's what I realized when I was a child. That's how I thought, and I had brought that into adulthood.
Yeah.
And so that was such an eye opener. And now I have a whole different pattern that's, I've been applying these rules of engagement for a while, a whole different pattern of interacting with that sin now than I did 10 years ago. But you had to be honest with yourself, and you have to ask God honestly, search me and show me whatever's wrong, because I trust you, God. You're not here to kill me.
Hmm.
You're here to resurrect me. You're here to make me
Yeah.
live.
I've I remember coming across the question of what is it that I really want right now, because the just don't do it doesn't work. Like that's never been a helpful. Just say no. I think that communication research people have discovered that's probably the worst um, campaign ever. It just doesn't help. Just tell yourself no for most people. But if I ask myself, what is it that I really want right now? Oftentimes, even if I didn't answer the question, but if I just gave my mind that ball to throw up and down, it could distract just long enough that I could change the channel in my mind. But
Yes.
but it makes me wonder, like going back to the Jeep story, um, what is it that I wanted? Like what was it? Um, yeah, I think there would even be something to dig into there and find out what would I get for myself if I had that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think it'd just be fascinating to ask ourselves more questions.
That is really, really good. It's almost like, how the grass is always greener is a real driver. If you've ever read the book His Needs, Her Needs,
Mhm.
one of the knocks on His Needs, Her Needs is every single chapter starts with, here's Bob. Bob didn't do good in this aspect of his marriage. Bob's marriage blew up.
Uh-huh.
Here's Susie. She didn't do good, and it's almost like they earned it. And I get the point he's making.
Yeah.
Because it is, these are real life examples. Of people, but it is true that a common thread through almost every story is they thought the grass was greener on the other side.
Mm.
You know, but when you really put yourself, let's stay with the car example. When you put, so you're in the car. Okay, now number one, you've got to think, what is your debt load now? What things haven't you been able to do because of that? But even if you get the car, somebody just hands it to you, you'll still like your car in 5 years, but it won't be that fulfillment that you've been looking for, and you'll replace it with something else. That's assuming you're human, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I know a few humans that get something and like, I'm satisfied with this forever. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so even that, it's like it still would be fine to have. Um, whereas if you're talking sexual lust, well, there's a whole nother layer of dynamic of destruction there.
Yeah.
Because it's like, so let's say that happened. What I'm hoping happens here happened. Well, there when where would I be? You know, and what would that be? You have to keep reminding yourself, because maybe in certain situations that would look good. What I mean? That'd be better than your present situation, or you think it would. But there are spiritual consequences, not punishment. I mean, there's a punishment place, but in when you're in Christ, there is no condemnation, but there are consequences.
Yeah.
you know and when I talk to people that have had affairs, they will say, man, God has been good to me and he's put me in a better space and this kind of thing. But if they're honest with me, they'll be, here are the ongoing consequences I face.
Yeah.
you know and that's not an anti, if you're listening to this in your divorce, God's working with you, that's great. I'm simply saying, or if you've had an affair, yeah, I mean, God brings life in every situation. The key though is looking forward. I think most people that have had affairs would say, let me talk to you. I mean,
Yeah.
I would want you to avoid that,
Yeah.
because of the destructive nature.
I've been thinking about this with my sermon next Sunday on sloth. It is sloth, right? I hope
That's
that's
what we're
right.
calling it.
Um,
First, you have to describe what it is.
well, I think this fits here, but that idea of, excuse me, of consequences. I feel like when we say to people, join together, when we talk about that as a rule of engagement, to join with other brothers and sisters in this battle. And then the first out of the gate is lust.
Mhm.
And we say to people, hey, be aware, draw near to God, stand with him, and join with others. That join with others, it almost feels like, okay, now what lust are we talking about? Then I'm getting pretty sketchy once we get to joining with others.
Mhm.
It, and I feel like if anybody feels that way, we should recognize, is that a consequence of decisions that we've already made?
Mhm.
Because this isn't brand new to join together, but we do build fences around where will I allow other people in? What will I allow them to know? Um, so am I living out consequences of decisions I've made of putting up barriers? And
Wow.
I am not saying you tell everybody everything. I think that's a very unhealthy extreme to move into. But we were watching as a family, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Have you seen this?
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That it was so good, and I don't ever want to watch it
Yeah.
again. But
That's Tom Hanks, right? That's Tom Hanks.
yes, the story of Mr. Rogers. He makes the statement to the guy. They're talking about death. Somebody's dying, and he's saying, "Hey, we it's this is a part of the human experience. So we ought to be able to talk about it." And he makes the statement, "Whatever is mentionable is manageable." And I thought that is biblical.
Yeah.
The I mean, I think that is what John is talking about when he says, if you are walking in the light, um, then you are with Christ. But when you start to not walk in the light, I think is to start walking in the things that you can't mention to anybody else.
Hmm.
And I think that's what he's talking about. If you can't mention this, if you can't share this with other people, um, you can't manage it.
Yeah.
And when you can't manage it, Satan is winning. So
Right.
so it's walking in the light. And again, I don't think you have to share it with everybody you know, but I think if you don't have a circle that you can mention everything, that's probably a consequence of decisions that you've made in the past, and you may want to check out those decisions.
Mhm.
Because I that if it is mentionable, it is manageable. Man, I think that's biblical.
I do. I hadn't remembered that, but when you said it, I was like, yeah, that was really eye-opening. I think we may have said this before, but I think it bears repeating. As a model, I would say, just to or come right alongside what you're saying, when you think about intimacy with others, I just recognize that Jesus had three, then he had nine others, so he had 12. And if you think about it in circles, that sometimes helps. He had 72 that he empowered and sent out, which may have included the 12. He had, and then he had 500 disciples, and there was a multitude. He loved everybody, but he invested differently. And the closer it got, the more intimate it got. So Peter, James, and John knew things that Thaddeus didn't know. And I think that's a good model for us, not the numbers, but the spirit of, am I sowing with a few people honesty?
Mhm.
And understanding that takes a while to build trust. And especially if you've been burnt, hurt by relationships, it takes a while. But as you said many times, Tim, pain happens in community, but healing comes in community.
Mhm.
And so I think that's why he specifically said in James, it's another passage I didn't get to, God will heal us, but he builds into the recipe, if you will, confess your sin one to another, James 5:16, so that you will receive healing. Now, if you were lost on a desert island, desert island, is that anyway? But if you were alone in the world, if you're the last man on earth kind of thing, yeah, God would still heal you and save you. But there's something about living in community that is not a suggestion. It's a
Yeah.
it's a fundamental part. And the challenge is, and this is my point of view, I believe most churches encourage you not to be honest because I mean we have people now talk about this, and I think it's reasonable to talk about, but oh, now we've been honest on social media, now how can we worship together? And my response is, you were thinking differently beforehand. Now you just know some more
Yeah.
stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the assumption was we were thinking alike before, and you never were thinking alike. We've never, God didn't create us so differently so then we could become this homogenous group together. It just doesn't work like that. What does happen though is we come together and we train ourselves to not tell the truth.
Yeah.
And then what happens is we tend to take that practice to our relationship with God. And that is killing our relationships with God. Because we think what he mostly wants is us to show up at a place and go through the right motions. And he's like, if I wanted that, I would have detailed that.
Yeah.
But that's not in the New Testament. Come to this room for this hour and do these things this way. It's just people are making it up. And to some degree, you have to figure out how that works in real time. But to say this is the godliness we practice is this hour, that is not biblical.
Yeah. Yeah. When I feel like we just talked about this recently, when it does say the pattern, follow the
Yeah.
pattern I've set for you. Uh, I can't say every time because I don't have each scripture dedicated to memory, but I feel like generally the theme of the scripture is suffering. Like
Yeah.
it's not about a order of service. It's about a call to suffering. And
Yeah.
boy, if we can avoid anything, we avoid that.
That's right. You know what's interesting? Something Gigi said. We had our. This got me thinking. We're processing somewhat like this. I just with 12, 13 of us, after services on Zoom, and Gigi Stewart said something that's really good, and I want to contextualize it. One of the things I think is really important, if you going back to Matthew 5:28, if you think noticing somebody is attractive is within itself sin, then what that means is most of that is subconscious noticing. Like you notice before you notice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't think I will now look at this person. You just notice, And so now it happens so fast that it feels like it's one motion, but it's really a multitude of emotions. As James 1 sets out, there's multiple steps that are happening, but when you have it in a habit, it seems like it's one thing. So you have to step back and say, wait a minute, what's happening? But one of the things, I think it was Gerald Payton said this. He said, a dirty person, a person that is dirty, will be much more likely to get dirty. But a person that feels clean will have great second thoughts about getting dirty. And what I would do, I'd change the terminology. I would say, if you feel defeated, like if I say, I never want to lust again, but let's say it's cars. I'd never want to lust again about cars. And then I notice a car and say, I really like that car. And I think that is equal to lust, which means being dragged away by my cravings, then I'm already defeated. That leaves me, I don't think it's twice as much. I think it's probably 10 times more susceptible for the devil just to make me feel worthless and ashamed. And here's what Gigi says so good. When we are defeated, we lose our motivation to sacrifice. We lose our endurance to suffer.
Huh.
And I think that's what's happening. So think about the irony of this. The church says you need to keep sacrificing, right? But the message is, but if you come in here with any of your sins, you're in trouble. You need to come in here already cleaned up. Now, I'm not saying anybody says that, but that's the feel that most people have about church. And so we're asking people to sacrifice while simultaneously saying you're probably defeated already.
Mm.
We're actually killing the very spirit of what we're trying to create.
Yeah. Man, that is fascinating that we say her quote again.
Yeah, she
We
said,
lose our
when we are
ability to suffer.
defeated, when we are defeated, we lose our motivation to sacrifice, our
Motivation to
endurance to suffer.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
Wow. Man, that's one of those. Has she been reading my diary? Moments of, yeah, you're putting words to how I have felt. When I don't think I can overcome, why begin the sacrifice if I know I'm going to give up anyway?
Right.
Hmm.
Now, this dynamic of feeling there is this, how do I say this? Our motivation determines what we will end up doing, not our knowledge. Our motivation, our drive, what we're passionate about, and part of our passion feels like we can do it. In other words, If you have a passion for playing a sport, but you're terrible at it, I'm not talking about watching the sport, but playing a sport, eventually that passion won't be a driver anymore,
Yeah.
you know? And this is kind of the thing. I think people when they're initially saved, they have a passion for Christ, but I think we spend so much time telling people, "Oh, you're still doing it wrong," that eventually that just tapers off, and people historically have stayed with it because, well, where else am I going to go? I don't want to go to hell, you know. Instead of saying, no, wait a minute, that's just Jesus. I was talking to somebody earlier about how are we going to do this specific ministry thing, and I said, here's a part I don't know, but I've tried to reset my brain that when something comes up that I don't know how to do it, I force myself to think that is what God is going to surprise me with in the future.
Yeah.
When he shows me how to do that, it's going to be
Mm.
so good. It's not, well, I can't do it because I can't figure it out.
Man, so I'm having flashbacks of all the things I've given up on. Um, Growing up with a big brother who was multi talented. Like he drew a picture of Jim Palmer, famous baseball player. He drew a picture of him that 20 years later, my sister saw him, Jim Palmer, calling a baseball game. He's standing there with a microphone 20 years later. And she goes, Dust, didn't you draw that guy when you were in junior high? Like he drew the guy well. And
Wow.
so I tried to draw one of my favorite baseball players, not near as good. And so I gave up. I can't I had no motivation because I wasn't going to succeed because I wasn't as good. Later on, I saw a picture of what I drew, and it dawned on me, well, it doesn't look like who I was trying to draw, but it looks like a real person. Like
Yeah.
it looked like, hey, had I tried a little bit more, could have done it.
Right.
But and that is my life story when it comes to sports. Like Dusty was going to make sure I did not win. And I mean, because he was always a little bit better than me at basketball, but I bet I never won. I mean, the law of our averages would say I would win some one game, but man, it was that big brother, little brother that I was not going to win. And he knew it, and I knew it. And there's a trail of why why really try, because it's not going to be. I'm not going to succeed. That's sorry. That's all
No,
unnecessary commentary. But
no, no, that's that to me, that's gold because that's real. You know, here's what's fascinating. You and I decided to do a whole month saying, we are victorious. We are
yeah,
victorious. We are victorious. But for most people that are listening to that, it doesn't click until they recognize where they feel defeated.
mm,
But we have trained people unintentionally, I believe, to not notice where they're defeated because that hurts and it could bring shame. And so we want to stay away from it.
yeah,
So instead of taking that victory message and applying it to our most hurting parts, we treat it cognitively and say, yes, we are victorious. And the reason I know is I've had so many conversations with people. I know you can relate to this over the years. And we'll be in a personal conversation, and all of a sudden something will pop in their mind and they make a connection. And I remember this happened all the time. Terry would say something, Terry Rush, your dad, you've met him. But Terry would say something 100 times, and I'd be in a conversation with a person, and they'd be talking, and all of a sudden something he said would land. Now they wouldn't say Terry said something.
mhm,
It was like it was their own discovery. And as they're unpacking, I'm like, that's what Terry's been saying for probably 30 years. You know what I mean? And yet for them, it was the first time.
mm,
And it's the same for me that we learn at our own pace. It doesn't matter what the preacher's saying. I'm not saying our sermons are useless. I'm simply saying it's to the degree that I can take in that I will learn.
yeah,
And that's the point, is this idea of victory doesn't matter until you can own where you feel defeated.
yeah. I wonder. So we take verses like "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," and we put those in our gymnasiums and locker rooms, and it makes me think: at what point do people not are they not okay with defeat because it feels unspiritual? It feels like they are not spiritual if they didn't win, or if they didn't, not even they didn't win, but they just didn't succeed. And so they can't admit that to themselves. And so slide it off the table and just put blinders on and pretend like that didn't happen. Because if I accept that I'm not good in this area, um, I can't be a Christian, or I can't be God's beloved child. Like there's something um, we just can't handle our own failure.
That's so good. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Our friend Chris Johnson says often that there is a labeling competition between God and the devil.
Mm-hmm.
That is the same facts, but the devil says, either do you see you can't trust God with this, or do you see how much of a failure you are, you will never be worthy. God says you can trust me, but I understand that it looks shaky a lot of times,
Yeah.
and I'm telling you I will bring good out of all of this, that you are more than a conqueror, and so it comes down to, whose labeling do we believe
Yeah.
about us? And the challenge is, I'm just owning all this. I, as a minister, at times am not in touch with people that aren't thinking about the Bible all the time, like I have the luxury to be thinking about Jesus all the time, like I have the luxury to be thinking about. And so how it comes across is, do you see how far you are away? You better get started. And to the person that's been working as hard as they know how, where do you go from there?
Yeah.
You shut down, even if you don't want to. You just, out of self-preservation, you just shut down and you say, I'll do the best I can. But when somebody says, hey, Jesus wants to offer you the abundant life, you're like, yeah, right. And then notice how this affects me reaching out to other people. Hey, come be part of what I am, that I can't seem to get right.
Yeah.
you know and I think this chain dramatically has affected Christianity in our world. And I think this, what we're doing, not just you and I, but the congregation, is really trying to push back on that, and say, wait a minute, we can be honest with God, fully honest, even in the depth of our sin, even in the moment of our sin. We can turn to God and he's not ashamed of us. He's like, yeah, let's do this, let's go.
Yeah. Man, that's good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm certain we're out of time, but it did occur to me, not to tell you, not that this will make it into your lesson next week, but when I think about sloth, it reminds me of what you're just saying, that stuck feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how many times I give into laziness because I already feel defeated, and I just let dread get me. And that's how it shows up in my life. Although when you preach, I may think of 5 other ways it shows up in my
Yeah.
life, but that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So we had an email from somebody when was it last week after we preached, somebody wrote us both and said, hey, when you talk about this subject, it dawns on me, I don't struggle with that subject until it dawns on me I do, and I don't when I think of the classic version, but then I see there are areas in my life that so they were saying, I'm anxious to hear what we talk about. And the way you set up lust yesterday, I thought was so good, because it allows us to say, okay, even if I think I don't struggle with sexual lust, there are places in my life that I am drawn away, or I am pulled away. And I feel like that with sloth. Um, I don't know if I'll talk about this or not, but I think of taxes, like what's going on there. And I mean, it's just what we were talking about, that overwhelming sense of I can't do this. And I get this huge packet uh, that I've used since I was a missionary, and I've got to fill it out. And since we've moved back to the States, it's 20 times larger. And I read through it the first time and I can't answer a single question. But what I've learned is the second time through, yeah, I know some stuff. It's just that first, it's like reading Shakespeare in high school, where you're like, this is a different language. And so I know that this is how this system is going to play out, but it feels so hard to click on the link to begin with and print off the form. And oh, I can't do this. Now I've done it enough to know I can do it. I can do it. I've got to remind myself I've turned it in on time every year. This I can do this, but there's something about, oh no, the motivation to sacrifice when I think I can't really get there is just so hard.
That's so true. Now I'm really excited about this everything we've been talking about. I'm really excited about because I'm telling you, and the teacher always learns twice as much as anybody listening, but I really, this is so good for my soul. The whole
Mhm.
series is because it has really helped me to catch myself in the middle of bad patterns, child
Yeah.
learned patterns.
Yeah.
I'm really hopeful, and I get feedback from people all the time that seems like it's affecting them, even though they're not the teachers, so they're learning half as much theoretically. That it's impacting them too. So I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah. Fascinating.
It is.
All right. You going to go play in the snow?
I'm going to shovel.
Oh, are you
I
really?
you got Heather got a tremendous picture, but we didn't take it while it was snowing. I didn't think I should have done that. I made Heather go out and take the picture of our house when I saw yours.
Yeah.
So credit to her. So on that little love thing, we do on Facebook, it's like
Yeah.
who goes out and does the heavy duty work?
Yep.
Heather.
Heather.
And I will go shovel. I will shovel. So.
Yeah. We went yesterday and did the sled, did some,
I'm
we
so
don't have
jealous.
we don't have sleds. We have boogie boards from when we lived in Mexico.
Really?
And we live next to a runoff that has a pretty steep drop. Oh
Right.
my goodness. It was the best sledding we've had because it had that 2-inch layer of ice underneath.
Yeah.
When the first child went, we were just amazed at how far they kept going once it
Yeah.
leveled out. So much fun.
So can I come over when you go next time?
Oh yeah, come on over.
Yeah, please give me a chance. My kids decided about 5 years ago they were done with it, and so it's hurt my heart ever since. And then it
Dude,
doesn't snow so much.
I think I remember trying to go sledding with you at McClure Park
Yes.
when we were here before going to Mexico, and you and Heather and Eli had just moved to
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
we tried trash can lids and it just
Yeah.
wasn't a good snow for it.
Those were the days. All
All
right,
right, yeah,
man. Thank you
come
so
on
much.
over.
All right.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye.